So I'm here to share the story of my daughter Annie's life, including the revelations, inspirations, and changes that resulted from the circumstances of her death almost 10 years ago. My goal is to improve the communication between parents and physicians such that when the child ultimately passes, the parents will have peace with the death. And I know what it is not to have that peace, so that's important to find that for other parents. Annie's story began with a high suspicion of trisomy 13 or 18 based on the 20-week ultrasound. We were told that these conditions were incompatible with life, and providers clearly believed there was nothing positive to come of continuing the pregnancy. We understood and accepted the bleak statistics, but I just couldn't take an action to stop my daughter's beating heart. I'm an automotive engineer in my past, and I guess I compared it to a car along the line with a foundational flaw. I mean, logically, you would remove the car from the line. You wouldn't finish the car if it couldn't be fixed at the end. Well, that makes total sense. But this was my daughter, and just stopping her life because it was going to be short just wasn't logical to me or to my husband. I refused the amnio offered and made that clear that I didn't want it because the results would not change my decision. But the physician told me, well, he was going to order it anyway, and then if I wanted, I could cancel. It was like the doctor didn't hear me when I had refused. It was an ominous sign. As most people given a diagnosis do, we searched online to learn more. We were surprised to find many survivors of trisomy 13 and 18. The children seemed happy, and the parents, while admitting to the many challenges, managed and thrived. My husband and I were touched to meet others who accepted their child's life, however long, and created meaningful memories. This is little Bristol, who lived 2 months. Dad is so proud of her. We were concerned about the effect of Annie's life and death on her siblings, but we learned how to talk to our children from other parents and discovered that when babies with trisomy 13 or 18 survived, the siblings had a very special relationship with them. This is little John Paul. He has full trisomy 13. It's nice to see the kids in action. He sure loves that horse. And this is Annabelle. Try it again. There she is. Annabelle has full trisomy 18. She lived for 4 years and had a cardiac surgery. The children do progress just slowly at their own pace. We met many medical doctors with children with trisomy 13 and learned that most of them were alive because of life-saving interventions. We realized there was a possibility that Annie might live for some time if she received medical care. But was it a life worth living? When children with these conditions died, parents were not relieved or unburdened. They were distraught, as any parent of any child would be. Nobody had regrets for the care that their child received or the life that they lived. We arranged meetings at the Children's Hospital to discuss our hopes and plans for Annie. We didn't want her to live on machines, nor did we want to prolong her life if it was one of suffering or continual interventions. A mother last night was telling me she referred to it as a bridge of healing, an intervention that's a bridge of healing. I like that phrase. Allowing death for these reasons was different to us than accepting death as an alternative to caring for a disabled child. To give up on Annie without an assessment and consideration of care would lead to a regret in our mind. The notes taken at these meetings described my husband and me as calm and rational, framed in best interest thinking. We were assured of the care our daughter would receive. Annie arrived full term, 7 pounds, APGARs 8 and 9. The hypoplastic left heart that had been predicted through 3 prenatal echoes was not there. She was diagnosed with trisomy 13, but had neither the serious brain nor heart anomalies that are common with the condition. She was kept in the ward in the hospital for management of low blood sugar and needed a very small amount of oxygen. What a huge celebration when Annie came home. The children decorated the driveway with special messages like, "I love you, you rock this house, and you're kicking butt." At the age of 80 days, Annie developed respiratory distress and was rushed to the Children's Hospital. At first, we were told she had pneumonia, but we understood this was a treatable condition. We were asked 3 times by different physicians if she was DNR status, but without the discussion we anticipated about futility or with an explanation of why death was better than treatment and life for Annie. Less than 24 hours after arrival, Annie suddenly and rapidly declined, and we were told she needed invasive surgery to essentially remake her trachea because it was too narrow. The surgery had a high mortality rate for infants without chromosomal challenges. Clearly, it was not in Annie's best interest. We chose not to intubate, and she passed away. However, in the weeks that followed, I pondered the events of the final day, and I was uneasy with them, particularly the apparent early misdiagnosis of pneumonia. We obtained the records and were shocked to discover that a do not resuscitate order had been placed in Annie's records before our consent to withdraw care. The records for the final hour were absent, and in time we discovered that 20 milligrams of morphine, as well as 100 micrograms of fentanyl, quantities far exceeding therapeutic dosage, had been withdrawn from the narcotic cabinet in Annie's name. Yet all associated mandatory records related to the ordering, administration, and wastage of these medications were absent. We were distraught and shocked by what had happened. The hospital offered little explanation, but did apologize for communication. When it goes, it really goes. Okay. A physician who was a former president of the Canadian Pediatric Society investigated and reported on Annie's death at the behest of the coroner's pediatric committee. The care Annie received on the final day was deemed to be inappropriate, but worse yet was that the surgery described to us, upon which we had made the decision to withdraw care, was reported as not certain. The coroner's office refused to comment on the opiates administered, and only when we felt driven to consider exhumation did the coroner reveal that fentanyl had been administered. The time and amount of administration were withheld from us. We will never know what caused Annie's sudden decline or whether medical care might have enabled her to live a longer, comfortable life. I couldn't understand how communication we expected to occur with highly trained physicians we trusted and respected at a hospital considered to be world-class did not occur. I began to explore the medical environment in which Annie had received care. Maybe it would help me to understand. The year of Annie's birth, the Health Ministry had launched a coordinated prenatal genetics program and informed providers of the new program with a PowerPoint presentation. One slide was this. It was of a stillborn with cyclopia, an extreme case of trisomy 13. But the physician who created the slideshow paired the picture with a mythical cyclops. There was another picture with a child with a fused leg condition placed alongside of a mermaid. I wondered, did the picture serve to dehumanize the children with these conditions? In contrast, here's a picture of a family I know that they took of their stillborn with the very same anomaly. She was loved and treated with dignity. I was alarmed to discover that the health system refused to fund a home apnea monitor explicitly for newborns if the reason for the apnea was a pre-existing condition. I understood this to mean that babies with prenatal diagnoses like Annie were targeted and treated differently than other babies. I obtained a copy of a policy analysis for expanding a screening program for Down syndrome from one of the provinces. I understood from the analysis that there was a cost-saving incentive to prenatal genetics. Counseling for prenatal diagnoses is supposed to be with unbiased information and without pressure, yet there was no monitoring or oversight. There seemed to be a very eerie potential for eugenics. One neonatologist I met confided that he had been taught that all babies with trisomy 13 and 18 died soon after birth, and the standard of care at his hospital when a baby was born was to administer morphine every 3 hours until the baby died. I pondered all of this. Inexplicably, a simple conversation about what was best for Annie with doctors we trusted never occurred. I discovered a medical environment that seemed to dehumanize her, withhold relatively inexpensive home equipment, and possibly encourage termination as a means to limit healthcare costs. It seemed that before Annie had drawn her first breath, the medical system had determined her fate based on her genetic label. Something had to change. I published Annie's story in the Canadian Pediatric Journal and spoke at many different conferences. Here's the heroes of my story. Eventually, I met Dr. Annie Janvier and Dr. Ben Wilfond, both who are physicians and leading pediatric ethicists in Canada and the United States, respectively. They were curious and surprised by what I had told them about living children with trisomy 13 and 18. They directed me to the standard of care guidelines. ILCOR, or the International Liaison Committee on Resuscitation, had for many years recommended that resuscitation be withheld from newborns with trisomy 13 and 18. The basis was risk of early death and unacceptable morbidity among survivors. Most countries have adopted these guidelines. Nuffield Bioethics is the national ethics group in the UK, and they issued a major report about care in the ICU on the basis that there were no long-term survivors of trisomy 13. Yet, within minutes of reading this report, I found 3 older people from the UK with full trisomy 13 in online support groups. At the suggestion of Dr. Janvier and Dr. Wilfond, I undertook a literature review. Everything I read about trisomy 13 and 18 was negative. For example, in '92, there was an article in the American medical magazine Lancet that said that it wasn't enough to let a baby with trisomy 18 die. Maybe they should be helped to die. And more recently, in 2011, one physician referred to the survivor of trisomy 18 as a suboptimal outcome. But it's really the pictures in the journal that spoke 1,000 words, and Marty showed them earlier. And when you contrast them with the pictures that parents see, you see this stark contrast. Other families and our mothers were complaining and writing in medical journals. Pauline Thiel from Australia published her story in the British Medical Journal. After she was diagnosed and decided to carry to term, her hospital said, "We will not deliver your baby here." Dr. Siri Fuglenberg from Norway had her baby, and she needed CPAP at birth, and she sensed that the doctors were rushing her baby to die. Dr. Janvier and Wilfond believe that good ethics mean that every patient has a right to be heard in the medical literature. And so we sought together to complement the literature by surveying and reporting on the experience of families who have a baby with trisomy 13 or 18. Nobody had ever asked them their experience and published it. So all of the clinical guidelines were based on assumptions. Our first article was published in the journal Pediatrics. The editor issued a press release, and over 40 media articles in 5 languages were published around the world. Our research was based on 372 parent surveys, very large sample size for a rare condition. And it produced many findings. Perhaps most significantly was what providers told parents when they received the diagnosis for their child who was unborn or newly born. And these are some of the things that parents were told. But for the most part, their experience was contrast. It was contrary. 98% described their child's life as positive, regardless of longevity, and that's important. And for surviving children, almost all of them were described as happy and enriching their life and the lives of their siblings. And marriages actually did not fall apart, as everybody assumed. Parents reported a positive, transforming experience, even if the baby's life was short. Our study also found that it was a prenatal diagnosis, not the anomalies the child might have, that was the most significant factor leading to early death. It should be disturbing to everyone that over half of the parents that we surveyed that had a prenatal diagnosis experienced pressure to terminate. Nobody should ever feel pressure to terminate. We presented our research at numerous conferences, including the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities, the Pediatric Academic Societies, and numerous hospitals, including grand rounds at Boston Children's Hospital, and prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital. Changing times are evident. One of the top 10 children's hospitals in America issued a press release last year describing the change in care they offer to newborns with trisomy 13 and 18. They actually issued a press release. It is by no means about offering intensive care to all babies born with trisomy 13 or 18, but rather about recognizing that each child and family is unique, and some babies might benefit from care. Physicians need to understand and respect the value of time that some parents hold with their children. The World Health Organization recommends palliative care be offered at the beginning of a life-limiting diagnosis and at the same time as any possible curative efforts, recognizing that the transition to purely palliative or hospice care may occur later. This, I believe, is the appropriate requirement for perinatal palliative care for diagnoses of trisomy 13 and 18. After our first paper was published, the parents created this poster for Dr. Janvier and Dr. Wilfond. It hangs proudly in the offices of these fine physicians who, having no personal agenda or beliefs on the subject, cared enough to take the time to listen and who had the humility and open mind to change their thinking. This is a little video of Annie responding to a kiss on her cheek. There it is. Increasingly, publications are showing that many parents who terminate are suffering psychological effects from that. Yet, at the same time, there are many publications who show that parents who continue have experienced not only less harm, but a positive and transformative experience. We really need to listen and think about these things as prenatal diagnoses expand. We don't know what might have been for our daughter. Maybe it was her time to pass away, but we sure wish we had received different care and that her siblings had had a chance to say goodbye. But maybe she would have lived longer. We realize her disability and that we might not have been able to teach her much, but we believe we would have learned a lot from her. My hope is that today, her story has contributed to the learning at this wonderful conference. Thank you.